We are live, Kristen.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Krista Davis, Olentangy's Chief Communications Officer, and we are thrilled to have all of you with us this evening for our community conversation. With me this evening is our Superintendent, Todd Meyer, our Treasurer, Ryan Jenkins, our Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Jack Fetty, and our Chief Operations Officer, Jeff Gordon. And so what we will do is go through the presentation, the community conversation presentation. We received a handful of questions in advance of the presentation from community members, which I will be posing throughout the community conversation. And then you are welcome to enter your questions in the Q&A, and we will ask those at the end. If you hear your question maybe reworded in a different way, there might be a case in point where multiple questions come in that are of a similar nature, so I may just summarize those. So that is how we will do this. And so with that, we will start, next slide, with our presentation overview. The first thing we'll do is just give a brief overview of the district. Then we'll dive into resource stewardship and then student enrollment and talk a little bit more about the ballot issue specifically. The slide says, please save all questions until the end of the presentation, but again, you can put your questions in the live event Q&A. Next slide. All right, this is just a lot of definitions related to levy language. This can be found on our district website under community levy information. This PowerPoint will be there, including this levy language 101 slide. These terms are just helpful as you learn more about the ballot issue and what the district is asking of the community. Next slide. You will see this slide again. This tells you an overview of our district needs, which first and foremost is to control our enrollment or manage our enrollment, to address aging facilities and equipment, to continue to address safety and security for our buildings and our students, continue our operating funds, and update our existing buildings. Also, it includes 5 different school buildings, elementary 18 and 19, which would open in the 2025-26 school year, high school 5, which would open in the 27-28 school year, and then middle school 7 and elementary 20, which would open in the 28-29 school year. Again, you will see the slide a little bit later in the presentation, but this summarizes what the ask includes. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Todd Meyer.
All right. Well, thank you, Krista, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's been a great couple months as we've been out in the community, having conversations all over the community. And again, our goal tonight is to educate and not advocate. So I'm going to start with some district facts and a brief overview of the district. Next slide, please. All right, so what makes Olentangy unique? And I'm really going to start with bullet 2. We are the fastest growing school district in the state, experienced exponential growth over the last 30 years. And I want to put some context around the growth. So in 1990, we were around 2,000 students. When I moved into the district in 2007, we were just a little over 13,000 students, and today we are over 24,000 students. We have a large school district, 95 square miles, spans 2 counties, 4 cities, and 7 townships. The only Ohio school district with over 10,000 students that performs at a high academic level with a lower cost per pupil. And we'll talk a little more about that when we get into the resource stewardship section. And I also want to highlight, because this is a highlight for the district, 66% of our staff choose to live in the Olentangy community, and we're extremely proud of that. The graph on the right, this question was asked a couple months ago at our key communicators meeting, of the largest districts in the state, how many facilities do they have? So you can see this graph here. Olentangy, we're the 4th largest district in the state. And again, at Prent, we're now over 24,000 students, but we have 27 Olentangy schools. We do run some of the largest elementaries, middle schools, and high schools in the area and across the state. Next slide, please. All right, district accolades, and again, as the 4th largest district in the state, extremely proud of the results that we continue to get. You can see there, 5-star school district, only 12% of Ohio school districts received 5 stars this past year. But I want to emphasize up there in the right-hand corner, Olentangy Schools Performance Index at a 103.3. 108 was the highest performance in the index or in the state last year. Olentangy ranked 34th in Ohio out of 607 districts, 4th in Central Ohio out of 49 districts. And what the performance index is, it takes students across all of our state tests across all grade levels who score in 5 bands: basic, limited, proficient, accomplished, and advanced. And the higher percent of students that score higher, proficient above, than the school districts assigned perform or index points. So again, as you can see, we had a high percentage of our students that scored proficient, accomplished, and advanced on those tests. Next slide, please. Who we are. We are now the 2nd largest employer in Delaware County, just behind JP Morgan Chase. This year, we started the school year with over 3,000 employees. What we're extremely proud of is the retention rate at 94.48%, because we talk a lot about student experience, and student experience is extremely important for us. But as an organization, we need to continue to attract and retain top talent. Olentangy currently has a very strong brand, a very strong reputation, and we have the ability to continue to attract top talent. But a main goal for us is to continue to retain top talent in our organization. Next slide.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. I am now going to turn it over to our treasurer, Mr. Ryan Jenkins, to talk about resource stewardship. And then at the conclusion of his section, I will begin to put some questions out there for us all.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining in. As we like to talk about here in Olentangy Schools, we have educational excellence, but we also promote an exceptional value. So the slides that we're going to show this evening help to illustrate what we mean by that. As a district, the most recent CUP report or district profile report from the 22-23 school year shows that we spend about $13,735 per. Out of context, the number doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. So we try to provide context by showing what other districts that are in kind of 3 buckets look like as well. The ODEW comparable districts. These would be districts that by ODE's typology are most similar to the Olentangy schools when it comes to property valuation, income, other demographic factors. Those schools are spending about $1,600 more per pupil than we are on average. Just a simple trip around the 270 outer belt and Central Ohio districts are averaging about $2,100 more per pupil. And then the state average is just coming in just a shade under $15,500. So we are among, certainly in all of our cohort groups, the lowest, if not the lowest, in expenditure per pupil. So we have been asked how we sometimes can accomplish that. And we thought through after a couple of into context what we've done since just the 1920 school year. That list is in front of you now. Wanted to highlight just a couple of things. The energy savings program and the school construction and design savings, those two items total about $10.4 million. We know how to build schools well. We know the energy savings features that have the highest return on investment, and certainly we have the ability to replicate school designs to really hold the design service costs down, as we have some pretty good footprints for buildings that we then are able to not only build quickly, efficiently, but also at much lower costs than if we were to try to scrap it or do a different footprint each time. We've saved $3 million in November of 2023. We granted a premium holiday for our employees, but the flip of that is, since 80% of loss fund is from the employer, the Board of Education, that saved $3 million for the Olentangy schools in November of 2023. Since the 2020 school year, we have refunded about $12 million in aggregate debt service. When interest rates fell during the COVID pandemic, probably everybody took advantage of refinancing your home, and you took out a new mortgage, borrowed money to pay off an old mortgage, and you ostensibly got a much lower interest rate. We can do the same thing and have done the same thing. We would have refunded, I believe, 3 to 4 issues since the 2020 fiscal year. We are able to take a current outstanding debt and sell new debt to pay off the old debt at a much lower interest rate, and we therefore cut aggregate principal and interest, and you can see that total just a shade under $12 million. We always analyze our bus route efficiency. We have in the number of tiers that we have and how full our buses are. We also analyze walk zones. We take a look and always make sure routes are the most efficient way to get kids to and from school. And so we have significant savings there. Workers' compensation, we are self-insured. Had we paid into the state loss fund rather than have our own loss fund, we would have paid about $2.3 million more. And then finally, we would have worked with the county auditor to reduce our overall tax rate by an additional $1.25 million on top of the House Bill 920 tax reduction factors. This kept our residents' 2024 payable tax bills in aggregate about $8.5 million less than what the 2024 tax bills otherwise would have been. We will show that in just a moment, what that looks like for each homeowner based on a kind of a sample of home market values. I'm ready for the next one, Dusty. So oftentimes we're asked how hard we work to increase state formula funding, and we work exceptionally hard. And the good news is we have dramatically increased our state funding. As recently as the last levy in the district, which would have been in 2020, we would have probably about $600 in formula funding per pupil. We have worked exceptionally hard, and we have increased that funding through the work of our legislators and advocacy efforts to $1,604 per pupil in formula funding. When you look, though, at comparable districts, that same group earlier, and we'll see who they are in just a minute, we're still got some work to do. We'd love to be able to have the $2,000 per pupil that they do. $100 ahead of us or so. Central Ohio average around $2,500, and then the state average is around $5,558. So as a district, the state funding increases that we have been able to gain are directly reflected in this being among the lowest levy asset we've had in the last 30 years operationally. We'll talk more about that in the future, but the state funding that we get dollar for dollar helps us to reduce what we have to ask our public for. So we want to acknowledge that, but it does not altogether eliminate the need for us, obviously, to be on the ballot on March the 19th. So our expenditures are another key statistic. What do we do with the dollars when we get them? It's probably as important as the dollars themselves. And we are spending 74% of what we get on direct instruction. With operations and administration, we have to operate our buildings, lights, the different things that we have to do to feed students, bus them to school, utilities and whatnot. But you don't want those expenditures to become disproportionate in terms of what you spend. And certainly you don't want administrative overhead to become disproportionate. Not only are we among the highest schools, certainly top 30, and in our cohort groups, top 3 or 4, in what we spend in as a percent of our expenditures for instruction, but we're the flip-flop of that on the operations and administration, in that we are the lowest in that same group of schools. In fact, our administrative costs at 10.71% per pupil is certainly among the top 30 in the state of Ohio across all districts. That can be challenging at times for exceptionally large schools to keep their overhead and administrative costs within reason, and we absolutely feel like we accomplish that as a district. I'm ready, Desi. Thanks. So when you look at our revenue streams, we will always be in Olentangy predominantly locally funded. The funding formula from the state of Ohio relies on and expects a local community to provide a share of the state funding, and that share is measured essentially by the capacity of that local school district. Our capacity is viewed by the funding formula to be among the higher, and so we'll never see the state formula funding ever eclipse 50% of what we get. But certainly at 14% now, it's nearly double what it was the last time we were on the ballot. As we noted earlier, we've worked exceptionally hard to increase our state revenue, and we believe that we're making strides, and we'll continue to try to make those strides. The miscellaneous column is one we've gotten a lot of questions about. The miscellaneous, the largest portion of that 10.96% are the funds that we receive where we're held harmless by the different tax development incentives, TIFs, CRAs throughout the district. About $34 to $35 million annually is paid to the district, so that we are, in essence, a non-school TIF or a non-school tax abatement agreement. Non-school meaning we get what we are supposed to get in spite of the tax abatement. So many of the abatements that we have throughout the Olentangy schools are non-school, and we certainly stress that as much as we can, and work with our fellow entities, townships, counties, to always make sure that development doesn't ultimately harm the district. So earlier we talked about the $1.25 million rollback. Average valuation for a residential property in the Olentangy schools was about a 34% increase. Most folks would logically believe that that means tax bills had to go up by 34%, and or Olentangy's tax collections went up by 34%, and neither one of those is true. Back in 1976, the Ohio legislature passed House Bill 920, and what House Bill 920 does is, as valuations increase, the tax rates that are applied to those values decreases, so that at a macro level, the school district does not get any more on voted levies for existing properties from year to year. That is a calculation that is done every year. Those are called tax reduction factors. As a district, even though tax rates, beg your pardon, values were up 34% across residential values, dropped 22%. We contributed to that overall drop by working with the county auditor to reduce our debt service collections from 7.5 mils to 6.25 mils. That $1.25 drop would have allowed, based on the chart that you see, based on home value, for a home, if you look at your 2024 tax bill, which would have just been paid and due within the last couple of weeks in Delaware County, that 2024 tax bill would have been, in the column on the right, that much higher without this proactive move by the Olentangy schools. Now, notice that this is not saying that tax bills dropped from what you paid in 23 to 24. Certainly, there are people whose tax bills increased from what they paid in 23 to 24. There are also people whose tax bills dropped from what they paid in 23 to 24 based on how their home appreciated versus that. So what this chart is showing is, if you own, for example, a $400,000 or $500,000 home, your 2024 tax bill would have been $153 higher without this move, or it would have been $191 higher on a $500,000 home without this proactive move to reduce the tax rates. So another thing that we like to look at is when we chart how we perform versus what we spend. As a district, we are positioned on this chart where on the vertical axis we have the performance index, and on the horizontal axis we have expenditure per pupil. So the general direction you want to be is high and to the left. And that's exactly where we are as a district. Now, this cohort represents some schools around us that are similar to us in a lot of ways: Dublin, Hilliard, Westerville, metropolitans. But this cohort is specifically just Olentangy versus other large school districts that have 10,000 or more students. We certainly are performing better than any school in this cohort, and the only school that spends less than us would be Lakota Local. And as you look at Dublin City, Hilliard, or Westerville, we're both outperforming and underspending. So if you go to the next slide, Dusty, the next question might be, okay, well, what about districts that are more similar to us? And so this is our similar district typology. A few slides back, when we looked at the ODEW comparable districts, these are those schools. So again, our position doesn't change, but the schools around us are different. Some schools are near us and schools that we all recognize: New Albany, Plain Local, Upper Arlington City, Dublin City. Some schools, up in Akron, you got Hudson, Sycamore Community, which is in Cincinnati, Forest Hills down around Cincinnati. Would love to be able to say, and we certainly have our work cut out for us, to increase our performance index score. Even though we're 34th in the state, we want to do better. But we also can see that juxtaposed to those districts, we're spending quite a lot less than, say, Upper Arlington City and Dublin City for the performance levels that they get compared to what we do. Ready for the next one, Dusty?
At this point, Ryan, I am going to ask some funding questions related to the section that you just went over.
Okay.
So the first question I have for you, we just talked about cost expenditures per pupil and tax rates. So could you speak a little bit to how much are the tax rates in other districts who spend more per pupil than Olentangy does? If their rates are lower, could you please explain how comparable districts are able to charge lower rates?
Yeah. Yes. So ultimately, we have that data, and there are, among those other districts, there are some of them who are able to charge less when it comes to the effective millage that we are. A principal reason that they're able to charge less, as you can see on a few slides back, we don't get as much state revenue as the comparable districts. At the end of the day, the funding formula that gets enacted each year works off of previous funding formulas in determining what the new state funding will be year over year. So as a district, Olentangy has worked exceptionally hard to get to where we are now. But certainly as we've grown, as we've had to add buildings and also add the operational dollars to operate those buildings a little more frequently, in some cases, maybe than those other schools that aren't growing as fast as we are.
Thank you. The next question we have is related to state funding, and thinking about being comparable to other districts. If they get more state funding, would it be safe to say that it's obvious that as long as we keep paying more into schools, then there is no reason that the state will see to increase our funding? So this is a question really about if we keep voting as local taxpayers for increases in funding, does the state then see no reason to increase our funding?
So my thoughts and an answer on that would be that the state funding formula is designed to address the needs of around 607 public school districts throughout the state of Ohio. I can't imagine that any one school not passing levies is going to somehow cause our state legislators to decide, well, since we can't get levies passed in that district, it looks like we need to send them more state funding. That's just not a reality. What ostensibly would happen is if we couldn't pass levies and we continued to grow and began to experience significant operational deficits, we would ultimately, based on 5-year projections, you can get into a scenario where you get into fiscal watch, fiscal emergency. When that happens, generally, schools aren't able to perform or do the things that they are normally able to do. We see the 103.3 performance index. We see a fantastic score on our state report card, 5 stars. And it starts to suffer, then I would believe that the schools will become less appealing. And as schools become less appealing, home values and community value could begin to dwindle. So no, I do not think that by simply saying we stop passing levies, that a state legislature is going to somehow carve out of a future funding bill more money for any district, let alone Olentangy, that would choose to fail repeated levies.
Okay, you also talked a little bit about employee benefits and healthcare. Could you go back and just touch on that again? Are OLSD employee benefits such as healthcare also self-insured?
That is, I'll wait till I get the live symbol. That is exactly what the Olentangy program is self-insured. So what self-insured means is every pay period, the employees that take our healthcare will have their portion of the premium deducted from their payroll checks, which represents roughly 20% of the cost. Then the Olentangy schools will take the other 80% and we will pay it into our self-insured loss fund. That self-insured loss fund is analyzed every year by an actuary. We have frequent self-insurance meetings with all of our associations, certainly employee representative groups. We analyze premiums and we take a look at, more importantly, trends in how we're spending our healthcare dollars. And so, yeah, that is a move that when you get as large as Olentangy schools are, you have enough covered lives that going self-insured and cost-effective way. We have kept our traditional year-over-year increases in insurance costs more in line with the 4 to 5% than current actuarial medical trends, which can run as high as 7 to 8%. Again, we've also issued a premium holiday, so we have continued to try to be diligent and good stewards because outside of the expenses for salaries, benefits is the second largest cost for any business like a school district. That is, 80 to 85% people and personnel costs to begin with.
Thank you. Related to insurance and health coverage, has the district seen any dramatic increase in budget related to medications or just general health coverage that employees need?
So we're handling into our self-insured meetings, and the data is obviously HIPAA protected. It's screened so that we're not getting into specific things for a specific individual, but we are very much digging into trends with prescription drugs, other types of conditions that are chronic or acute, and that can drive claims dollars without getting into high-level details about, we have this one particular group of claims or particular condition. With a group our size, we are taking a look always at a dashboard of different healthcare trends. The good news is at the macro level, our current premiums from the fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24 year, I guess technically I should say, since we're a 1/1 renewal date, our premiums went up only about 4% this year. %. So again, all of those trends are analyzed in great detail, and I would just simply try to answer that question that yes, as trends or other things come on the horizon that impact what we do, we make ourselves aware of it and make good decisions.
All right, thank you. Can you address a rumor out there or something that's been talked about in the community? Did Olentangy get a large windfall of money from the legalization of Ohio's sports gambling? Does Olentangy get additional funding from gaming in Ohio, including the Ohio Lottery or casinos?
So we actually wrote an FAQ about that because when that ran on WBNS, we wanted to be sure that we got ahead of any thoughts. The article, had to read it pretty carefully. We do not receive direct funding from the lottery or from the legalization of sports gaming or gambling. We do receive a very small amount of casino funding. I'll cover in a minute and quantify what that means. In general, what the Ohio General Assembly does is every couple of years, it determines the Ohio public schools, the funding formula, which is currently called the Fair School Funding Formula. A significant chunk of resources that go into the Fair School Funding Formula come from the state's general fund, but they also augment and add to that funds from the lottery and also funds from other gaming. When it's all said and done, though, schools get then a direct amount of money that is a state funding formula. And during the pendency of the 2-year period of that state funding formula, it's not as if windfalls of cash from any additional profits and or other gaming receipts that come into the state of Ohio are funneled to schools. Again, the Ohio funding formula uses 2 or 3 different buckets, so to speak, of state revenue to create what it gives to schools. And a part of that recipe would be those gaming proceeds. The article from WBNS noted and specifically stated that the money schools are receiving are a combination of gambling money and general funds. So in other words, the amounts noted for the various Ohio public schools in that article, again, we're not a windfall or an addition of funding of what we're already getting in the funding formula. So the article noted, for example, that Olentangy Schools was receiving $36.9 million for the 23-24 school year. That's just the current number for the formula funding that we get from the state of Ohio in this budget. It pointed out 2 or 3 other schools, Columbus Public. It pointed out, I think, Hilliard City. If you look carefully at the numbers that were reported in that story, it was just their 23-24 state funding number. The final piece of gaming or gambling money that we do get directly is we do get a piece of the casino profits. To quantify that, though, for the 23-24 school year, we received a payment of $1.5 million. That amounts to about $69 of funding per pupil, and it's about 0.5% of our total general fund in this fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. At this point, we are going to keep moving forward with our next section, student enrollment, that Mr. Meyer will walk us through.
Okay, thank you, Krista. All right, we can go, Dustin, we can go to the next slide. You may have to click a couple. There you go. Okay. Thank you for that. So again, as stated at the beginning of the presentation, really our why is enrollment management. As we continue to grow here in Olentangy, we have to manage the enrollment and plan for what's coming. So currently, this slide's actually already outdated when it went to print. You can see our current enrollment preschool through 12 is now over 24,000 as of today. We're projected to grow by 5,000 students over the next 10 years, 20% at all levels. I'm going to break that down per level here coming up. But again, for us, we have to be able to manage and accommodate the growth that's coming and plan for that growth. Next slide, please. There you go. Thank you. This is a slide that was presented to the Board of Education in October from our Facilities Committee. Our Facilities Committee consists of district residents who work in all types of various industries. You can see our current enrollment this year, pre-K 12, they're in the green, and then they project out. Our Facilities Committee updates every year, but projects out 10 years. So with this pre-K 5, you can see projections over the next 10 years. Our enrollment in pre-K 5 is expected to grow by over 2,400 students. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for us, you can see, and this is our current reality, and this is with building no additional buildings, with the exception of Peach Blow Crossing. You can see Peach Blow Crossing there in the 23-24 column at 0%. That building will open next year, and we've already redistricted for that building. But you can see currently 12 of 16 of our elementaries are at or over capacity. I want to point out Cheshire Elementary at 133%. So what we had to, as a district, we had to make a decision to put 6 modular classrooms there at Cheshire to accommodate the 834 students. The reality for us is if we would not have done that, we would have probably overflowed 150 plus students out of Cheshire into our some of our other elementaries. Currently, Cheshire Elementary is closed. We're overflowing every grade level out of Cheshire. So that means when a new family moves into the district through the current, right now, as of today, we're overflowing every grade level. So as a matter of fact, we are overflowing out of Cheshire, all grade levels, grade levels out of Freedom Trail, 2 grade levels out of Glen Oak, and then kindergarten out of Indian Springs. So this is, again, represents, this table represents if we do nothing moving forward. You can see the problem does not go away as far as capacity in our buildings. So if we do nothing, we're going to continue to increase class sizes. We'll continue to make decisions about adding modular classrooms across elementary schools. And for sure, we'll continue with overflow, and we'll get into multiple redistrictings. Okay, next slide. Same concept here at the middle school. You can see what was presented to our Board of Education in October from the Facilities Committee. Current enrollment, and then projected enrollment over the next 10 years. Middle schools are projected to grow by 1,100 students. And for us, 1,100 students, that's a middle school as far as capacity. Next slide, please. And you can see the capacity issues that we do have at our middle schools. We did relieve Berkshire this year with the opening of Berlin Middle School. So Berlin Middle School did exactly what it was supposed to do. It relieved Berkshire and some out of Hyatt's Middle School. But as we continue to grow, our middle school population will continue to grow. And you can see with doing nothing, what happens to our middle schools over the years. So we are recommending the open middle school 7 there in 28-29, which obviously if we open middle school 7 in that year, we would reduce the building utilization percentages. Okay, next slide. This is our high school graph that was presented to the Board of Education in October. Current enrollment and projected to grow a little over 1,500 students in the high schools the next 10 years. Next slide. And this is our high school reality. So currently 2 at or 2 over capacity. And as we go through the years, I do want to point out the Berlin attendance boundary, because where it currently sits north of Hyatt's, west all the way east in the district, that's the attendance boundary for Berlin High School. So just probably off this chart in the 30, 31, 31, 32 school, if we do nothing, Berlin High School is projected to grow to 3,500 to 3,600 students. So again, without opening a 5th high school, we would have to do multiple redistrictings out of our high schools, probably starting in the 26-27 school year. And we'd have to balance our enrollment out of Berlin back into our other 3 high schools, which would probably increase our high school enrollments if they were evenly distributed and balanced by the time we get out to 31, 32 to 2,400 to 2,600 students per high school. One thing that I did want to mention, I think I forgot to mention this up front in our enrollment. So our trajectory the next 10 years is mirroring what happened the past 10 years. So in the last 10 years here in Olentangy, we grew by a little over 5,400 students. And in that time, we opened equivalent to 5 buildings, high school, middle school, 2 elementaries, and then we did add on to 3 of our elementaries, and then added, we renovated 12 classrooms at Shanahan Middle School, which would be the equivalent of an elementary. This, so we put this, and this is hypothetical because we were, and again, throughout our conversations, many questions have been asked. So somebody asked the question, are we building enough, and how do we know based on our projections? So this is just hypothetical. So if we were built out in this scenario at 20 elementary, 7 middle schools, and 5 high schools, and you take our enrollment in 2930, you can see our enrollment by level there. So evenly distributed across our district, you can see that we would have the capacity to accommodate our projected growth. Now, Mr. Jenkins brought this question up, or somebody brought this question. Were we concerned about utilization being the 90%? Really what that tells us is we're on target. We don't want to overbuild. So again, we want to be mindful of that based on projections that are coming. So we're confident in the 5 buildings to accommodate the growth at this point, with these 5 buildings, what's projected to come. Next slide.
Mr. Meyer, this is where we're going to take some questions about enrollment, and I think this next question ties in really well with what you just were talking about. Has there been a study as to when the growth is expected to slow and new schools will no longer be needed?
Yeah, great question. We show, our facilities committee shows the projections out 10 years, but we do use Wolpert as well that does analysis after 10 years. So based on that analysis, as of 10 days, we're projected in Olentangy to peak in the early 2040s at just shy of 32,000 students. Currently, as we're zoned, we are 78% built out here in Olentangy.
Great, thank you. And then a follow-up question related to growth and our schools. You touched on it a little bit earlier at the beginning of the presentation, but talk a little bit about building larger schools to hold more students than the size of the schools that we currently have.
Yeah, great question. And this question's been posed to us. But we, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, currently have some of the largest elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools in Central Ohio in the state. So for example, so our 4 high schools were 4 of the 16 largest in Central Ohio and 41 largest in the state. Average high school size in Ohio is 700 students. So obviously you can see we're averaging way over 700 students in our high schools. Our middle schools are 6 of the 40 largest in Ohio. Our 16 existing elementary schools are among the 20% largest K-5 in the state. The average K-5 elementary school in the state, I believe, is 430-ish students. And our average currently sits at enrollment is over 650 in our elementary schools. So, you know, we've looked at this as a district, and our facilities committee has studied costs and savings related to many school designs and configurations over the years. And they've determined that our current school designs minimize construction costs and minimize operational efficiencies. So based on that, we feel that building bigger schools could add additional cost to taxpayers. Also, I want to emphasize the student experience, because I mentioned, I touched on that briefly at the beginning. Student experience for us is extremely important as we serve students in all of our schools, so elementary school, middle schools, and high schools. A personalized learning experience is extremely important for us here in Olentangy, and as our schools continue to grow, you lose that personalization and relationship piece in our schools. Also, just want to emphasize opportunities. I was a high school principal for 14 years, so I saw as our high schools continue to grow, it does take away from opportunities for our students. And it could be opportunities in elective courses, extracurricular, co-curricular. You know, that is a concern because, again, we want students to be connected to our schools. We want them to be involved in our schools. So that student experience is extremely important for us here in Olentangy.
Great. And related to that, could you speak a little bit about why build a new school building versus having students can be in mobile classrooms, and what have we done as a district to research these costs versus new buildings? And I know you might want to answer some of that and then turn it over to Mr. Gordon.
Yeah, and I'll start and then Mr. Gordon can finish. But our current reality, so for example, and I'm going to stick to this year. So we decided we made a decision to add 6 modular classrooms at Cheshire Elementary. For sure, the student experience is going to be a little bit different, but I'll just get into the cost for those 6 modular classrooms. So for us this year, it cost us $500,000 to bring the modulars to the school site, and then obviously all of the work that you need to hook the modulars up. So electric, technology, things like that. So $500,000, and then to lease another $90,000 to lease over the course of the year. So all of that cost, that's sunken cost. We get nothing from that. So all of that money went to accommodate what we needed to accommodate. So again, if you just multiply that over multiple school buildings, obviously we're getting into the millions of dollar range to basically just sit modular classrooms there and getting no investment out of that. And one thing I will mention, because Mr. Jenkins talked about how much the percent that we pay towards instruction. So our instruction. So right now, operationally, when we pay for these modulars, that comes out of our general fund. So it definitely would continue to have an impact on the percentage that we provide for instruction in our classroom. So Jeff, I'll turn it off. I'll turn it over to you because I know that you've done some other additional research on that.
Yes. So thank you, Mr. Meyer. Pods or modular buildings are, one, they're not a permanent solution. Temporarily, we were able to accommodate at Cheshire Elementary School, but as a permanent fix to not have to build more buildings, we can add pods on the outside of the buildings, but then we don't have space for lunches, space for our specials like gym and art, because we would add more students, but not necessarily more of that type of space, which would create a problem for us. Then that leads back to the building, or the question that you started with, Mr. Meyer, why not build our buildings bigger? And that is the educational experience. So we could build lunchrooms bigger and add those other spaces to accommodate for more students. And we're back to larger buildings, and we're already one of the larger school buildings in the state on average at all 3 levels. So that's the big challenge of adding the modulars out there, is it just adds more kids when you're limited inside the building for space for your specials and your lunchrooms, phys ed, those type of things. The other downside to using modulars long term is they're not built like school buildings. They're not going to last. You're going to continue to have to replace them. They're built as temporary structures that are set in place. So we're just not going to get the life expectancy out of those we get out of a regular school building with the type of construction that we do with the block and mortar.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Gordon. We are going to move on to keep us moving to the next section, which is the ballot issue. And Mr. Jenkins will start us off, and Mr. Meyer will be part of this as well. Mr. Jenkins, I have a number of questions in the chat related to the reappraisal and the information on the auditor's website. So I think you are covering some of that. If you could make sure to hit that in your explanation, as well as the language in the ballot issues specifically surrounding the terminology permanent improvement levy. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Krista. Yes, Dusty, if you're ready to move on to the next slide, I'll cover those issues. I don't know how bad I'm being told I'm cutting out. I'm and everything. I noted I don't know how significant it is. I hear all of you just fine. So with everyone's permission, I'll do that. Maybe that'll help. I've not had any hiccups on my end. I'm hearing all of you perfectly. So I guess if someone wants to give me a thumbs down, if I start to cut out, I'm not quite sure what to do about it. So sorry. Ultimately, the district needs, we've already covered this slide about where we're headed as a district and why this ballot issue is in front of the community. So Dusty, I'm ready to go to the next slide. The ballot issue itself is 3 mills of operations, 1.25 mills for permanent improvements. And permanent improvements, the word permanent has no reflection whatsoever on how long the levy is. A permanent improvement by law just means an expense for a piece of equipment or asset that has a 5-year or more useful life. So I know there's a lot of questions in the community about, why a permanent levy, and I'll also cover that because I see that in the chat as well. So the 3 mills are for operations and will be so that the district can continue to effectively meet its needs as we grow. And the 1.25 mills would be for permanent improvements, which are the expenses for the equipment and supplies and materials that are needed to upkeep our buildings. So think the maintenance and repair of roofs and windows and pavement in a parking lot, HVAC equipment, those sorts of things. So the 3 mills plus the 1.25 is 4.25 mills. 4.25 mills is $148.75 per $100,000 of home value on an annual basis. If you round it up to just simply 150, it makes the math easier. And so for a $400,000 home, that would be about $600 annually that would begin to be collected in 2025. Kind of that $400,000 to $500,000 range is the mathematical average value of a home in our district. So certainly, if your home was closer to the $500,000, it'd be closer to a $750 annual cost. So the question we're being asked is, why does the auditor's website show 2.72 mills for the bond issue? Ultimately, the 2.72 even began before that. As a district, we have to pass legislation. That legislation has to spell out what the levy language will be. The levy language very clearly states 3 mills of operations, 1.25 mills for permanent improvements, and then 2.72 mills for the bond issue. But the way Ohio levy law works is that ultimately, when a levy is approved by a state or political subdivision, that is the maximum authority that can be charged, but it ultimately does not have to be collected. Any levy that we have ostensibly is subject to the Budget Commission in the Delaware County saying that, hey, collecting that 3 mills of operations or that 1.25 mills of permanent improvements for this next fiscal year, right on target with the budget you submitted. So why we call it a no additional millage is, even though the legislation says that we could collect up to 2.72 mills, what we're saying is we will not need to collect, and we will not be collecting any of the 2.72 mills. As a district, we have taken this no additional millage strategy very seriously, and we've done it 5 times since the year 2000. We did it in 2001 when we passed the bond issue, 2004, 2011, 2016, and in 2020. The auditor's website now, if you actually look at it and you go to do a levy estimate, the auditor's website actually has that same disclaimer that our Board of Education, we passed a resolution at our last board meeting that the 2.72 mills will not be needed and will not be collected. So as a district, what we're saying is that the all-in tax rate increase is 4.25 mills. and we have successfully and historically been able to not collect any additional millage for the bond issue portion of our last 5 levies of that nature. So that is why the all-in rate is being forecasted as 4.25 mils. The final piece is the question we're getting in the chat is, why is this a permanent levy? Again, permanent does not refer to the period of time, but historically, for the past 20 years, the Olentangy schools, as do many schools in the Columbus Outer Belt region, realize that passing a levy is simply establishing a need that won't ostensibly disappear into the future. So those levies are passed on what's called a continuing period of time. If you were to look at all of the voted levies that are currently for Olentangy, except for bond issues, which are tied directly to a debt schedule, all of those existing levies are already also for a continuing period of time. This continues that trend and is not changing that. And then I've covered that slide, Dusty. So if we look at it as earlier, the cost to educate a child is $13,735. We know that the portion of the tax bill that's paid to the Olentangy schools on a $400,000 home is $5,553. Ostensibly, the tax bill would be higher than that, the total tax bill, because a portion of your taxes goes to the county, the township, other entities, but Olentangy's share would only be the $5,553. So if a family with 2 children lives in a $400,000 home, they're paying Olentangy schools $5,553 in taxes, but ultimately the cost of the education for those 2 students is $27,470. That's a difference of $21,917. That is a type of return on investment for the fact that the taxes, $5,553, are resulting in about $27,470 of educational value with the Olentangy schools.
Mr. Meyer's going to take this slide and the next one.
Yep, sure. So investment in Olentangy, obviously we talked a lot about the why in the 5 buildings, but also security personnel. I want to mention that at each of our elementaries. We currently have dedicated SROs at all of our high schools and middle schools. So if we're successful with this levy, we will add phased in over a 3-year period security personnel in all of our elementaries. Also, high school feeder updates, high school stadium updates, and then Shanahan Middle School renovations. I want to make sure that I mention that. So what renovations at Shanahan? Student restroom renovations, stage for performances for the performing arts, flooring upgrades, exterior door replacements, painting, concrete repair, and cabinetry replacements at Shanahan. Also, you can see there are some PI items listed on the right side of that slide. Okay, so we've, again, received this question a lot. So locations of future schools, and I'm going to start west with elementary school 18. And again, this is all district-owned land. So elementary 18, we own 20-some acres, and this is north on Sawmill, just west of Sawmill on Beanaller. That's the site for elementary school 18. If you continue to go north, Sawmill, just west of Bunty Station, we own 139 acres there. So that would be the site for high school 5 and potentially future elementary. We do have enough land there. if future elementary is needed to add there, and that would be similar to Liberty High School Indian Springs campus. So if you then go east, central part of the district, we own 55 plus acres there on Curve Road. That is the site for middle school 7 and elementary school 20. And again, similar to Hyatt's Liberty Tree campus. And then all the way east, right there, elementary school 19, that's on the Berkshire Middle School site. So again, long before I got here, planning for planning purposes with projected growth many, many years ago, we on that property, we have enough land to put an elementary. So the connector, 6 connector classrooms are already there at Berkshire Middle School. So we would connect elementary school 19 there at Berkshire Middle School.
All right, so we have some questions we would like to touch upon. First, I think this would be a good question for Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins, can the developers pay or contribute more to the building of new schools?
You want me to wait till maybe live? I can hear you. I just was waiting to be live.
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Okay. So this is a question that we sometimes get, and ultimately municipalities are the only entities that are able to collect impact fees. And when I say municipalities, I mean cities on new developments. Townships have tried in the past, but they've been struck down by the Supreme Court. The school district itself has no legal authority to assess or collect any type of fee on developers. We have partnered as much as we can where appropriate with developers to make sure that they understand the impact to schools. And certainly there have been developers that have donated land for new schools as they've tried to think about and understand how it impacts how the Olentangy schools operate. Most of the abatements in Olentangy schools are non-school. And when I say most, I mean the proportion of income that we get. Some of the most significant TIFs are non-school. That means that we get the revenue we would otherwise get, notwithstanding the TIF. Where we do have compensation agreements because a TIF exceeds 75% in total abatements or 10 years, we work exceptionally hard with developers and our local entities, townships, counties, cities, to be sure that we have appropriately provided them the impact as to what the proposed development will do. And certainly in some cases, commercial and industrial development is actually development that allows us to get a broader tax base without then direct student population. So some examples of TIF compensation payments, that we get as a district can involve cash or direct payments, but also, as noted, have come in the form of donated land for future schools and or the expansion of school infrastructure can help us to build roadways, walking paths, and utility infrastructure that also impacts and helps the schools.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Next, I am going to toss this question to Dr. Fetty. Does the district or has the district considered offering any evening or weekend programs that serve older adults, senior citizens who may not have kids in schools anymore and might encourage them to see the personal benefit in supporting the levy?
Good evening. So we provide programming for all citizens on a basis where we provide like our One Community program. And this Saturday, we have our wellness workshop at Orange High School. Put in a plug for that from 8 to noon. That is for all community members, whether or not you have students in schools. But our Career Center, which is on 23 across from the Boy Scout camp, they are taxpayer funded, and their responsibility is to provide adult education programs, evening classes for adults. They have a very robust offering that if anyone is interested, I would encourage you to go to their website and look into. They also have customizable programs as well. So we do not want to duplicate services that our other partners already provide, but we do want to still use our expertise to provide what we can to engage our community. So the One Community Conference in February was one example. We have the wellness workshop this weekend, and we continue to provide those opportunities throughout the school year.
Great, thank you. And I would add just a fun perk that we also have for Olentangy residents that are 60 or older is our Olentangy Rewards card, which allows you free admission into any of our sporting events across the district, as well as our musicals and plays that our high schools put on. And if you have not seen those, they are amazing. So that is just another benefit for those who may not have students in the schools right now. Moving on, we have the question about whether or not we have investigated splitting the district into 2 separate districts to improve our financial situation, like state funding. So let's see, how about we'll start with Mr. Meyer and then toss it to, and he can hand it over to Mr. Jenkins.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, this question has also come up. When considering splitting the district, it's not that easy. It would have to go to the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, ultimately to the General Assembly. But if you start asking the question about if you split the district, you have 2 superintendents, you have 2 treasurers. Currently, we have an elected Board of Education by our 95 square miles. So how do we split the board up? How do we split the teachers up? How do we split the rest of the staff up? How do we split our assets? How do we split our debt? For example, the commercial base, most of our commercial base is 23 corridor in the Polaris area. So we have that sitting basically on the east side of the district versus the west side, or Polaris in the south part of our district. So how does all that work? So it's would be a very complex process, and we do not feel here in Olentangy that would be in the best interest of the community based on what we've been able to build as a school district here. Mr. Jenkins, you can get into some more of the financials, but those are things that we've also listed as that questions on our FAQ.
So Mr. Meyer covered a lot of the main pieces of the idea of splitting the district. Really creates, in our view, far more problems than it does solutions. As mentioned, probably the biggest piece that stands out to me is wherever the commercial anchor of the district, which we know is the 23 backbone and kind of along Polaris Parkway, where the commercial and industrial, development, wherever that ends up landing in the split. And I wouldn't care to guess how the split would go, but let's say you just simply went north to south. You could actually see the taxes increase for residents in the area that didn't get that commercial growth or that commercial backbone. So again, we just see overall that as not being the solution that works best even for our residents.
Great, thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Meyer, could you please re-clarify your language regarding the security personnel and SROs, what the differences between the two of them, and how the district plans, if the levy is approved, to address the security personnel piece in our elementary buildings?
Yeah, I saw that question so yeah, let me elaborate. So correct. So we currently have SROs, so Delaware County Sheriff deputies in our high schools and middle schools. The Delaware County Sheriff's Office does not have the capacity to put SROs in all of our elementary schools because we currently have 16, soon to be 17 next year, and if we're successful, 20 elementaries. So we're working through our Office of Safety, Security, and Preparedness to identify security personnel, the credentials that they would need to serve in that capacity. And again, in collaboration with the Delaware County Sheriff's Office. So these individuals will have to be properly credentialed to meet the needs of what we expect here in Olentangy, and for sure, and working in collaboration with the Sheriff's Department, and all would go through the training within our Safety and Security Preparedness Office as far as how we move forward with credentialing and future training for the security personnel. So we're working, still working to finalize that proposal. And then again, we will not be able to put actual SROs in our elementary schools because, again, Delaware County Sheriff's Office just does not have the capacity.
Great. We are going to take the time to answer 2 more questions. And the first one I will send over to Mr. Jenkins. How does the state determine how much money a school district receives? And you can just go ahead and start talking. You will not see the live box.
Regardless of the funding formula and how it's changed, the general concept of any state funding formula that's been around for at least 30 to 40 years in the state of Ohio, there is an amount that the state calculates that it says is state funding, but then it almost always relies on a local property wealth measure to determine how much of that amount must be raised by the local school. In the past, it's been called the 20 mil, sometimes it's been 23 mil charge off. So the way to view it is the state of Ohio will calculate an aggregate amount that flows to a school district. But then it says the local community, we must take 23, when it was 23 mils, the charge off, or 20 mils, the equivalent of 20 mils. And the local community must come up with at least that much of that number. So imagine it this way. State of Ohio gives us $1. The state of Ohio says that you must come up with a certain percentage of that dollar. And the percentage you have to come up with is determined by how much your own wealth or how much your own income allows you to meet that dollar. So when you get to a district like Olentangy Schools that has a much higher property wealth than, say, a district in southeastern Ohio, 1 mil of taxes in Olentangy will raise 8-10 times what a mil of taxation would raise in southeastern Ohio. So that's why schools in southern Ohio or areas where there's not much economic growth or development, certainly not much growth in property valuation, tend to have more in state funding. So that was a very high level view that at the end of the day, whatever the formula funding is, based on your local property wealth and property, beg your pardon, and income now levels with the last couple of funding formulas, there's a calculation done that says for every dollar you get from the state, you locally must come up with X%. In the past, in Olentangy, that's been as high as 90%. Right now, we normally have to come up with somewhere around 80% of the state funding formula.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I have one last question for Mr. Meyer, and that is related to if the levy doesn't pass, how many buildings would be impacted with overcrowding and potentially modular classrooms? I recognize you might not be able to share with us which buildings specifically, but I think we can share kind of back where we were when we were talking about the overcapacity, the buildings that are overcapacity and how they will continue to grow.
Yeah, and so we would start with the elementary. So that previous slide showed 12 of 16 of our elementaries at or over capacity. So we would start looking at enrollments at those elementaries, and as they increase, have to make a determination which buildings might get modulars in order to serve the enrollments in those buildings. So for example, Scioto Ridge would be a building that we would look at. Glen Oak would be a building that we would look at. Moving forward further out, Liberty Tree would be a building that we would look at. But obviously we would have to continue to monitor the enrollment and then make the decision if and when we add modular classrooms to those elementaries based on building utilization and enrollment trends that we see in those elementaries. So not a crystal ball right now as far as exact buildings, but for sure we would continue to monitor and look at those buildings that would be high utilization buildings.
Thank you so much. And I think one of the things we've also stressed in relation to this topic is that at the middle and high school level, at the secondary level, there would definitely need to be redistricting to balance enrollment for the overcrowded classrooms and buildings at that level as well. At this point, we are going to wrap up. I realize we have not asked all questions, and we will publish the questions that we have asked, and then we will create additional FAQ questions on our district website to the ones that we were unable to get to. I think we've covered the main, most pressing topics that were in the chat, so hopefully you've felt that this is well worth your while. We really appreciate all of you spending an hour and 20 minutes with us this evening. And we are all, as a leadership team, a Board of Education, district employees, happy to answer any clarifying questions that you may have for us. And again, we encourage you to go to our district website, go to our levy information section, and read the FAQs that exist there now. So with that, thank you very much. Good night.